Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2022 Senate elections where I stand on these races as of today. So, before we get started with this video, please like this video, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please comment down your predictions so I can see where you guys stand. So, that being said, let's get right into it here and take a look at the current generic ballot polling and talk a little bit about that, because I think that's kind of the baseline for our general predictions here. So, as of right now, for the first time in like a year, the Democratic Party has a lead in the generic ballot. It's a very slim lead. It's only about 0.1%, but it still matters because on the day before Roe was overturned, the Republicans had a lead of about 2.5%. We've now seen a shift nationally of nearly 3 points towards the Democratic Party. And that means a lot because an even environment is a much better environment for the Democrats than an R+2 or R+3 environment. And when when the polls showed an R+3 environment, we were generally kind of thinking that since the polls underestimated Republicans, that the environment might have actually been R+4, R+5. And now that the polls are showing a Democratic environment for, again, the first time in a while, which is very significant, we can now potentially talk about an even environment, maybe even a Democratic-leaning environment, or maybe just a slight Republican environment. And again, every point nationwide matters. An R+4 environment is significantly worse for the Democrats than R+3, and R+3 is significantly worse for Democrats than R+2. So if the Democrats, I'll say this, if the Democratic Party does manage to have an even environment on election day, they're probably going to win the Senate. Now, do I think it's going to happen? No. I think that the polls are going to stay the same on election day, but I think ultimately, since the polls do tend to underestimate Republican support, I think the Republicans are going to win the national environment by about 1.5 to 2%, which again isn't amazing, but it's also still a win for them, which is what they need. So it will be kind of a red ripple as opposed to a red wave, because a red wave type environment would be like R+5, R+6, and a red ripple would be like R+1, R+2, like what I'm suggesting. So working under those set of assumptions, the environment's going to be R+1 to R+2, somewhere in that ballpark. Let's take a look at the Senate map and fill out our safe Democratic states here. So those states are Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. Whoops, I can't click. And then the latest addition to the safe Democratic column is Washington, because we had a primary here last Tuesday, and what we saw was that the Democratic Party outperformed expectations. So generally, the rule of thumb for Washington primaries is that the primary election is usually about 4 to 5% more Republican than the general election. And when you have, a primary that is, if for example, D+5 overall, the general is going to be around maybe R or D+10 in the general election because of those shifts. So the Democrats combined for about 56% of the vote in this primary. And that was a solid showing for them because they were expected to combine for maybe 51% of the vote. And the baseline for Washington being competitive was that Tiffany Smiley, the Republican candidate, and the other Republicans were going to, come very close to matching the Democratic votes in the primary, and that maybe in November it would be a much lower than expected percentage victory for the Democrats. But that hasn't happened. This primary was pretty bad for the Republicans. They had worse than expected turnout. They lost all the bellwether counties. Clallam County, the Democrats combined for nearly 53% of the vote in. If you look at Washington's 8th congressional district, which is the swing district of the state, the Democrats won the popular vote there as well. And it was just a really bad showing for the GOP in Washington, and I'm moving it back to the safe column after this primary. Now, for our Republican states, the safe Republican states are Idaho, the Dakotas, Kansas, both Oklahoma races, Alaska with Chewbacca and Murkowski, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, Indiana. And then we'll talk a little bit about some more states. The first safe state that we'll talk about here is Iowa. And Iowa's really interesting because, generally speaking, Chuck Grassley wins easily. Again, in 2016, he won with, I think 60-something% of the vote, and he outran Trump by, 15 points. So he's a really strong candidate. He's a good incumbent, but this time we've seen a fair bit of concern about his age, and all the polls show the race to be pretty close. Signal, which is a Republican internal, had Grassley only up by 15, which was a redacted margin from his 2016 margin. Michael Franken, the Democratic candidate here, released 2 internal polls. One had him down by 3, one had him down by 5. And again, the goal of these polls is to show him within reach of Chuck Grassley, although again, you never want to be down to your own internals. Des Moines Register here, which is, again, this is a Seltzer poll, and Seltzer is really the king poll of Iowa. because Ann Selzer is, for whatever reason, just incredible at polling the state. And when you disagree with Selzer 99% of the time, you're wrong, as a lot of people learned in 2020. A lot of people bet against Ann Selzer when she had the Republicans winning the Senate race and the governors in the presidential race, and the people that had Iowa going blue ultimately were wrong on election day. So betting against Selzer is never good, but this poll only had Grassley up by 8, which is concerning for him because he should be winning by double that. And then this other signal, which is a Republican poll, again only had Grassley up by 8. So the average here is something like only Grassley plus 7 or 8%. And that is really bad for him because he should be winning by a lot more. Now, that being said, the polls in Iowa do tend to underestimate Republican support. If you take a look at the 2020 polls, they only had Trump up by 2% on election day, and even in like September, October, Biden was leading in Iowa. But anyways, on election day, Trump had a 2-point lead and he won by 8%. So it's not too concerning for me, but I think Grassley's going to win by a little less than he won by in 2016. Missouri's up next. Missouri's safe Republican. To me, there's not too much you can say about Missouri because, again, the only way it would have been competitive would have been if Eric Greitens were to win the Republican primary. Again, Greitens was the former governor who had allegations of sexual assault against him, and he would have been a weak candidate for the general. He still probably would have won easily, but it would have probably moved on to the likely column if he won the nomination, but he didn't. Eric Schmidt got the nomination pretty easily, and he's the attorney general, and he's going to win by 17, 18% in a state like Missouri. The final state in the safe column is going to be Utah. Utah is not too competitive here. We've seen a fair bit of polling here because, again, the reason that Utah is going to get a little bit of attention is that there's an independent candidate running instead of a Democrat, and it's Evan McMullen. And McMullen ran for president in 2016. He was an independent, and he basically ran for president of Utah. He only really ran a campaign in Utah, and he got about 22% of the vote here. So he has a name here. He has a solid base, and he'll probably win most of the Democratic votes, and he'll probably win over some conservatives who just don't like the GOP too much. But McMullen is someone who I do think is going to lose this race, right? He would need a really good Democratic turnout and really good numbers from moderate and independent Republicans. And the thing is, Donald Trump might have performed poorly in Utah in 2016 and 2020, but Mitt Romney did better than him, Spencer Cox did better than him, and Mike Lee in 2016 better than him. So Utah down ballot still very, very Republican, about as red as it gets, and McMullen doesn't really stand a chance to be quite frank, even though he might be a little better than the Democrat. Now, for a likely Democratic state, the first state I'll be talking about is Colorado. And Colorado is really interesting because this is one of the few states where I think the Republicans lucked out with their candidate. And their candidate's Joe O'Dea, who's a moderate, I believe, pro-choice Republican who is essentially running to be kind of the Republican Joe Manchin. And he wants to really just hope that he can win over a lot of moderate Democrats and by a miracle flip this Senate seat. I don't think that's going to happen. Michael Bennett's a good incumbent. Michael Bennett won in 2010, which was a red wave year. He won in 2016, which was a very neutral year. And in 2022, we're probably going to see an environment maybe kind of similar to 2016. And the fact that Bennett won in 2016 back in Colorado was so much more red, so much more competitive, is just enough for me to have this in the likely column. I think Bennett's going to win. I think he's going to win by 8 or 9%. I don't think it'll be super close, but Joe O'Dea is a solid candidate for the Republicans. The next state in the likely Democratic column is New Hampshire, and I'm moving it up from lean to likely. And I say this because Maggie Hassan seems to be a very good incumbent. She's someone who has won in red waves. She won the 2014 governor's race as a Democrat in a red wave. She won the 2016 Senate election in a very mediocre year for Democrats against a solid incumbent who'd won by 24 points the previous time. And I just don't really like betting against Maggie Hassan. I know I did in 2021 when I thought Chris Noonan was going to run, and I would have had this race as a Republican if Noonan were to run. But ultimately, when you take a look at what we're seeing with the Democratic Party in New Hampshire, they seem to be doing fairly well. Maggie Hassan is a lot of money. New Hampshire is a very pro-choice state. And when the two Republican candidates are super pro-life, very conservative candidates, I don't think that they can appeal to New Hampshire voters. So I would personally think that Bulldogs can get the nomination. I think he loses by 5 or 6%. Chuck Morris might be a little better, but he would probably still lose by 4 points. So, likely Democratic for now. In the likely Republican column, I'm going to put 3 states here. Those are Florida, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So, in the state of Florida, we got a poll yesterday that had the race tied. It was a Democratic internal. It had Rubio at 45%, Demings at 45%. And while that may on the surface look like, wow, maybe the race is competitive, don't fall for it. It's an internal poll. Those polls are designed to get people get donations, and it'll probably be on Val Lemmings' website and be like, wow, we're tied with Marco Rubio. Please donate now to give us the lead, right? And in reality, Demings is probably down by double digits right now. She'd be lucky to lose by 6 or 7. That would be a respectable showing for her. But ultimately, Marco Rubio is very well liked in Florida. He's a good incumbent. He is, he's someone who I do think is going to have a lot of appeal to Cuban and Latino voters, just generally in Miami-Dade and the south part of the state. He'll probably outrun Trump with Hispanic voters, and so that's enough to me to give him the edge. Like Florida could be safe Republican, but I do say I do ratings by margin, and for me safe is a margin of 15% plus. And Rubio's probably going to win by a little under that. He'll probably win. I think he's going to win by 12 or something like that. So, yeah, likely Republican, but the Democrats would be very foolish to invest in Florida. Next up is Ohio, and Ohio's actually worth looking at the polls here because the polls in Ohio are a little divorced from reality, to be quite frank here. So, right now, Tim Ryan has nearly a 4-point lead, and he's been ahead in every poll we've seen as of late. We have one poll, or no, we had one poll recently that had JD Vance ahead, and it was USA Today Suffolk, which is usually a decent poll, and they had him only up by 2, which again was within striking distance for Tim Ryan. And since then, we've seen a lot of really good polls for Tim Ryan. Like this John Bolton Super PAC poll had Tim Ryan up by 6%. This Center Street PAC, which I believe is partnered with Survey Monkey, keeps following this race for some reason. They keep showing Tim Ryan ahead, and in these Tim Ryan internals, he's up by 3% in this one. He's up by 2% in this one, and he's in these Innovation Ohio polls, he's up by 3, up by 2, up by 5, and then in these Survey Monkey polls, he's up by double digits. So he's up in all these polls, and I don't really know why, to be quite frank. I don't really believe these polls for a second, to be honest with you. But wait, he's up by okay, sorry. Yeah, okay, he's up by 3.9. I don't know what happened. It froze, and it was up by 4.8. I don't know what happened. Okay, anyways. Tim Ryan is up by 3.9%. Whoops. Yeah. So, if Ryan's up by 4% on election day, I'll probably move it down to lean Republican. It's very hard for me to envision a scenario in which I move down to Tossup or even Tim Ryan favored, unless we get a ton of evidence to show that he's favored, and even then I'd be skeptical of it because it's Ohio and it's a very Republican state. But the thing is, the polls are probably going to narrow up by election day. And I do think that ultimately Tim Ryan is going to be down 2-3% in the polls by election day and lose by 8 or 9%. Because again, the thing you have to remember is that the polls in Ohio tend to underestimate Republican support. So I'm pretty skeptical of any Ohio polls that show Democratic leads in this type environment. Because for Democrats to win Ohio, they'd have to have a blue wave type environment and a really good candidate. And while Tim Ryan's a good candidate for sure, he just doesn't have the circumstances surrounding him to get him to win. And so when you look at the polls, Trump was only up by about a point on election day, and he won by 8. And if you convert that into what we're seeing right now, where Ryan's up by 4%, you get a 3-4 point Vance win. And again, if the election were held today, I could see that. But I think as Vance grows in name recognition, as the Republicans come home for their candidate, it'll be enough. Vance is gonna run a little bit even with pretty close to even with Trump. Finally, Wisconsin. I don't really Wisconsin is really weird because a year ago I expected it to be a very competitive Senate race with Ron Johnson not being the best incumbent and potentially Sarah Godlewski being the Democratic nominee. Because again, she was a good candidate for them at the start, it seemed like, but she has really faded. She had a bad primary. She's now dropped out, and it's now Mandela Barnes is now the de facto nominee. And so now that we've got Mandela Barnes versus Ron Johnson essentially set in stone, we can talk a little bit more about it. But I don't we only have one poll, and it showed Mandela Barnes beating Ron John by 2%. But remember, on election day, Trump was down by nearly 7 points in Wisconsin. He came within a point of beating Joe Biden. So polls in Wisconsin are really weird, and when the Republicans are in striking distance, it's generally always very good for them. And though generally speaking, Republicans will win Wisconsin unless they're really down in the polls. And Ron Johnson being not a good incumbent, but he's an incumbent who manages to pull it off every time, and it's hard to bet against him. So I'll put this race as likely Republican, and Barnes is just not the candidate for the Democrats this time. He's running a very left-wing progressive campaign, and I don't think that's the campaign you run when you're trying to win Wisconsin. So these are our kind of true toss-up races. These are the races that are lean or tilt, and so we're just going to get right into it here with our lean Democratic states in this one here. So this is the first time I'm putting the state in the lean Democratic column. It's interesting, but here we go. Georgia, lean Democratic. I didn't expect to be saying that. I always thought I'd have it in the toss-up tilt column, but yeah, I think with every day that goes by, I get more and more confident that Raphael Warnock's going to win. We have gotten poll after poll that has showed the Republicans doing very well in this governor's race. Brian Kemp, Stacey Abrams, that race seems to be headed towards a Republican victory. Brian Kemp, again, in the polls, in the 538 polling aggregate, Kemp's ahead by 5% over Stacey Abrams, which, again, Abrams can make it up for sure. She's been closing the gap a little bit here, but, when you look at all these polls, they all have Brian Kemp ahead. And I view Georgia as a state where the Republican Party has a potential to get a mixed outcome. I think they're going to win the Secretary of State race. I think they're going to win the attorney. I think they're going to win all the down ballot races, including the governor's race. But the Senate race is harsh for them because they have a really bad candidate here in Herschel Walker. And right now he's down the polls by about 3%. And again, the Georgia polls are actually decently accurate. If you look at 2020, Donald Trump was actually ahead in Georgia by about a point, and Biden went up by 0.3%. So the polls actually underestimated Democrats in Georgia. And while I don't think that's going to happen again, I think Warnock's going to win, but I don't think it'll be by 3. I think it'll be maybe by a point or so less. But the thing with Georgia is that the numbers are just really there for Raphael Warnock. In the 2021 runoffs, I don't know the exact number, but what happened was in 2020 when Biden won Georgia by about 0.2%, the Atlanta metro area cast as a percentage less votes than they did in the 2021 runoffs, because when you have a non-general election like a midterm or a runoff or a special election, one of those, the share of voters with college degrees goes up. The share of rural voters or voters without college degrees goes down because they're less likely to know that there's an election because they're less likely to be paying attention to politics. And so what you see is that in the past that's helped Republicans, because in the past white voters with degrees in Georgia backed Republicans, and in the 2008 runoff the Republicans did really well and they won the race by 15 points. And in 2021, for the first time, Democrats had the advantage with white college-educated voters. The suburbs were turning blue really quickly, and Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock were able to win their races. And I think we're going to see a similar thing again. I don't know if we're going to go to a runoff here. I think we will, because I don't know how much the Libertarian candidate's going to take away from Herschel Walker here, but it's going to be some. And so I do think Warnock's going to win by maybe a point in election, maybe win by 2 or 3 in the runoff, because I do think that a runoff would be better for Warnock than a general election, although he still can win in the November election. But point being here, when you have an electorate in Georgia, the electorate in Georgia is going to show up, is going to be more Democratic than 2020. If you ask every voter in Georgia on election day 2022 how they voted in 2020, they're going to be more Biden voters than they were in 2020 as a percentage. That's because the share of college degrees is going to go up, the share of voters from the Atlanta metro area is going to go up, and that's what helped the Democrats win the Georgia runoffs in 2022, and that's why I think Herschel Walker is going to lose this race to Raphael Warnock. Warnock's a good incumbent. The polls have him up in a state where the polls are usually pretty close to accurate, and Warnock just has the energy right now. He has so much cash on hand. He has a lot of appeal to the voters he needs to win, and as of right now, I could see Walker pulling it off, but again, we're talking probability. I think Warnock's the clear favorite at this point in time. Now, lean Republican states. There's only one here. That's North Carolina. Ted Budd seems to be beating Sherry Beasley, although again, it has been closer than I expected. I originally had this race in the likely Republican category, but I'm moving it down to lean. And I say that because when you look at the polls in North Carolina, they usually aren't great. Like in 2020, and I'll look at it in a second here. For right now, they have Ted Budd up by a point. In 2020, Biden led for the longest time, and then Trump took the lead on election day. He led by 0.2% in the RCP average, and he ended up winning by about a point more than that. So I think it's reasonable. Ted Budd's only up by a point in the polls right now. I think he's going to win by 4, maybe 3%. Because the thing is, people seem to really underestimate Sherry Beasley's chances of victory here. And I'm not saying that because I think she's going to win. I'm saying that because I think we should pay more attention to this race than we're paying attention. So in 2020, black voters only made up about 19% of North Carolina's electorate, which was not what the Democrats wanted. They wanted it to be 22, 23, 24% of the electorate. And that didn't happen. And Donald Trump won the state by about a point and a half. If black voters made up 22, 23% of the electorate, Biden probably would have narrowly eked out the state. But that isn't what happened. And, actually, in retrospect, the fact that Biden got so close with an electorate that was less black than he wanted, it's pretty remarkable, actually. And so Sherry Beasley, if she's able to boost black turnout to the amount that she has the potential to, and that, like there's a lot of hype about her potentially boosting black turnout, she has a very good chance of winning. That being said, that's an if. It's a big ask of her because, again, turnout operations are very hard to do, especially in a state like North Carolina, which has been very Republican leaning. And so, yeah, I think Sherry Beasley is going to lose, but she has a better chance than people think, and I'm moving it down from likely to lean as a result of that. Now, these are the toss-up states. The Republicans enter the toss-up with 49 seats. The Democrats enter it with 48. But the Republicans have to win 2 of these 3 seats to get Senate control. The Democrats only have to win 1. So the first state that I'm going to give out here, because I think it's the least close state, is Nevada. So Nevada, I expect to go to Catherine Cortez Masto by about the number that the polls have her up by. So if we take a look at who's ahead in Nevada right here, Cortez Masto has a lead of about a point and a half, and I think she's going to win by a similar amount here. She's been up in all the polls. There's this one Republican internal, which is McLaughlin Associates, which is a very Republican-leaning poll. And the fact that Lockstone's only up by 1% in it, and again, this is a pre-Dobbs poll, by the way. Like, this is pre all the abortion stuff, and Nevada's a super pro-choice state. Lockstone's only up by 1%. That's really bad for him. And, like in these other polls, Emerson had Cortez Masto up by 3, and again, this is a pretty good poll. It's 2,000 registered voters, big sample size, good poll. Cortez Masto up by 3, that's a pretty accurate result for now, especially because it's post-Dobbs. And yeah, I just think I think as of right now, Cortez Masto being is the favorite. The reason that the thing with Nevada is that people look at Nevada as a state that only voted for the Democrats by about 2.4% in 2020, and while it's technically true at the surface level, we have to remember this. In 2020, Joe Biden decided that it would be kind of pointless to campaign in Nevada because if he'd lost in Nevada, he was going to lose the election no matter what. Because Nevada's it was a Clinton state, and Biden needed to do better in states rather than Nevada. So he made that calculus, and he was correct in that. You don't win Wisconsin and Pennsylvania without winning Nevada in 2020 for Joe Biden. And so Trump actually made more of a play for Nevada than Biden did because Biden thought he had it locked up. And so the fact that because since Biden had it locked up or thought he had it locked up, the fact that Donald Trump came within 2.4% of winning it was pretty impressive, but ultimately it's kind of what we should have expected. It's what I expected. I had Nevada as Trump plus 3 or Biden plus 3 on election day. He won it by a little less. And so when you look at what Cortez Masto is going to try to do here, she's going to try to keep Hispanic turnout high. She's going to try to keep turnout from the city of Las Vegas high. And from what I've seen, she's doing a pretty good job of it. And also have to remember that Biden actually did pretty poorly with Hispanics in the city of Las Vegas itself. And Cortez Masto was a better candidate for them than Biden was. And ultimately, Democrats are going to have a much better time with their turnout operations now that COVID's not really a factor, and now that a lot of casinos and these businesses are going to be open, which they weren't back in 2020, which means that there will be more traffic in the city of Las Vegas just in general. It'll be a much busier city than it was during peak COVID. And so, yeah, I think that Cortez Masto is the favorite right now. It's very slim. Blackstone's a decent candidate for the Republicans, but yeah, Cortez Masto, for now, I'll put as a narrow favorite. Now, to tie it up here, I'll give the Republicans Pennsylvania. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, how do you still have Dr. Oz winning? John Fetterman has a clear polling lead. He's up by 10% right now in the polls. If you look at the polls right now, John Fetterman currently winning by 10%, or nearly 11% actually. And yeah, Fetterman's up, and he's up big right now. But the thing with Pennsylvania is that the polls are going to narrow up because in 2016, in the summer, McGinty had a 3-4 point polling lead, and she ultimately lost that race. And while that's a smaller gap than we're seeing that right now, the polls in 2016 were actually decent. They weren't good, but they were okay in some states. They're within the margin of error. The polls now have gone completely off the rails, and when you look at the crosstabs, Dr. Oz is underperforming with Republicans, and most of the voters are going to come home to him. I know he has an enthusiasm problem. I know that there's a significant number of Republicans who don't really like him, who would have preferred Barnett or McCormick instead. but like he's going to close the gap. It's pretty low hanging fruit here, and ultimately the Republican Party is going to really invest in this race to save him, and they're probably going to be successful here because ultimately Republicans might not like Dr. Oz, but they're not going to like John Fetterman any more than they like Dr. Oz. So they're going to vote for Dr. Oz. They're going to come over him, and they're going to reluctantly vote for Dr. Oz. And Dr. Oz is going to outrun expectations in the suburbs. He's going to do better than people think with white working class voters because a lot of the assumptions that Fetterman's going to do well with white working class voters are, like that he talks like them. He uses the vernacular that they use. He looks like them, right? And while Fetterman can like maybe do a little better than Biden in some places, these are still a very conservative trending group. And Dr. Oz, being the Republican, is going to attack John Fetterman all the time for his progressive policies, and that's going to hurt Fetterman. And I think the more people learn about Fetterman, the less they're going to like him. And ultimately, Dr. Oz is still favored to win the Senate race, although it is a lot closer than I originally expected it to be. Now, Arizona is the final state, and it's going to determine Senate control here. So, in the past, I've had it as lean Republican. I've had Kelly losing for a while now. But I'm changing my mind. I think Kelly's going to win. And I'm saying this based off of a couple of things. First of all, Mark Kelly is a very good incumbent, and he's better than I originally thought he was. If you look at 2020, he outran Biden by 2% against an incumbent Republican who, McSally wasn't a great candidate, but I think she was more electable than Blake Masters looking at it objectively. Because Blake Masters wants to privatize Social Security. He wants a personhood amendment. He's very pro-life, a very pro-choice state. And ultimately, when you take a look at these, at these voters that swung the election to Biden and Kelly in 2020, I don't think enough are going to cross over for Blake Masters for him to win. And remember, when you talk about midterm elections, the share of the electorate that has college degrees spikes. It goes up because, again, they're more likely to know that there's a midterm election, to be paying attention to politics, whatnot. And that's the group where I think Blake Masters is the most likely to underperform with. McSally actually outran Trump with with a lot of the college-educated voters in the exit polls in Arizona in 2020, and Masters probably going to do worse than McSally because there are a lot of Republicans voted for Joe Biden and Martha McSally who are probably going to vote for Mark Kelly this time because Blake Masters is just that extreme of a candidate for the Republicans. He is a very bad candidate for them. He's like the Republicans would have been a lot better running Jim Lamont or Mark Brnovich, and they probably would have won this race had they not run Blake Masters. So again, it's very close. Arizona is a state that I could absolutely see trending towards the Republicans this year, but as of right now, this is where I stand on the race in Arizona. I think Mark Kelly's going to win. It's going to be very close, but ultimately, when you take a look at the polls here, when you see the overall numbers, Mark Kelly is up by nearly 9 points, and if he's up by anything like that on election day, he'll probably be favored to beat Blake Masters. So Arizona tilt Democrat, and that gives the Democrats a Senate majority. So for the first time since I don't even remember, since like mid 2021, this is like the first time in a year I have the Democrats favored to win the Senate. This post Dobbs, post Roe stuff is really helping the Democratic Party. They're rebounding with a lot of voters, and Biden's approval is going up. The economy is getting a little better, and yeah, we're just I think Democrats are having a good time right now, and if that continues till November, they could maybe even pick up a seat in Pennsylvania. So this is my prediction as of today. If you enjoyed, please do like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.